I used to weigh almost 400 pounds. You've heard me talk about that, but you haven't heard about what that meant to me. And I want you, that's pretty egotistical. I hope that you will make a decision to stop letting them, and we can talk about them, make you fat and miserable and unhappy and depressed and weak. Now, I want to speak generally to men in this. When I was in my mid-30s, I honestly weighed, I got up to nearly 400 pounds, and I'm talking about 390 pounds. And if you're watching the video version of this, I sit before you now, and I forgot to take off this stupid, what are these called? They're not sweatshirts. What do y'all people call them in your age? These are hoodies. Hoodie. Okay, so this obviously makes me now somewhat, this is me identifying with people who wear hoodies. So you can't tell, but right now I weigh 208 pounds. So it's not a rant about an advertising partner. It's none of that. It is this. When I was out of control of food, I did not understand what had hooked me. And I'm willing to bet something has hooked you and you don't know it. My life changed when I saw myself get out of a cab on TV, and I was watching this with my PR agent, and this gob of whale with a stupidly long ponytail and a really bad-looking sweater vest thing that zipped up in the front, by the way. That's some class. Steps out of this cab in San Francisco, and I said to the PR lady, "Who is that?" She said, "That's you." Wow. Okay, that has to end. And the next day, I was back in the weight room, which is what I loved. I loved lifting weights. And I went through a process that, gosh, it took probably 4 years to take off 95 pounds. And I got some help in that towards the end, probably actually 5 or 6 years, honestly. I ended up going to Microsoft. I had some access to some information about diet and exercise. And in fact, Dr. Barry Sears, who I think did the Zone, right? He put on a workshop, and I listened and go, wow, oh, I can do this. But I did not understand what had hooked me. And I bet it has hooked you. And the second change in my life came when I was at Microsoft and an opportunity to be in the Taco Bell test kitchen, which was at the time in Burbank, California. So we're walking through the HQ there where they had their test kitchen, and I see up on the whiteboard, I stopped and I looked. Now you'd think it would be maybe ingredients, cheeses, etc. What it was actually chemical compounds written up under the whiteboard. And I stopped and looked at that and said, wow, that's fascinating. You guys have chemists here. She goes, oh yeah, we've got food chemists. I did some research later and learned that your government is part of them. The USDA takes a rake. Their so-called scientists take a rake, a percentage, for inventions that cause Americans to eat more cheese. So they hide cheese in things. The government was involved in creating things like taco shells that are cheese. They're not made with cheese, they are cheese. There is nothing in the world wrong with eating some cheese. They hide it in things for a reason, the same reason that they gave in to the now not sugar lobby, but the corn lobby to begin hiding high fructose corn syrup in everything, even like chicken breasts. What Americans are hooked on, and they don't understand they're hooked on, is it's very, very similar to drugs. Those chemical compounds, yeah, it's about making the food appear to taste better by playing games with your brain. Compare this to the new wave of social media companies that were new 12 years ago. You know what they did that was so interesting? They hired neurosurgeons and neurologists. Why? Because they wanted to know how to chemically tickle your brain. How do we build websites and apps that release a constant flow of dopamine, the pleasure drug. That is why you saw the change from websites that were things you had to page through. If you're old, you remember there were ends to pages of websites. You'd get to the bottom and the page ended. And then you went to another page. Well, that interrupted the flow of dopamine. It caused people to turn away from the screen. So using a coding methodology at the time called Ajax, they created what was at the time called the endless scroll. And that changed digital behaviors forever. So let's talk about the results of the digital dopamine and serotonin scrolls in your mind in relation to food so that we can stop letting them make us fat and miserable and weak, particularly men, which is what they want, I think. There's going to be in this country this comeuppance, and there's already signs that it's working. Did you see Mark Zuckerberg now says he's done with politics? I think we talked about this the other day. Did you notice that came along at the time that Mark began practicing combat sports and CrossFit and probably switching from things like seed oils to pure butter? I mean, that's what we're designed to eat. We are also designed to use the compounds God gave us to help us if we need it. I love my Bone Frog coffee. I drink it for taste. It's the first time I've ever drunk coffee for taste. It tastes different because Tim Cruikshank, the founder and CEO and a very dear friend of mine, he worked with a coffee legend to create these roasts. A guy named Dave Stewart. Look up, just Google Dave Stewart coffee, Seattle's best coffee. You'll get an idea of why this guy is a legend. And Dave makes some of the roasts for Bone Frog, and he mentors the team on the rest of the roasts. I also drink coffee because it is a massively powerful antidepressant. And it's been years since I've really been given the depression, but one of the things I did when I weighed nearly 400 pounds is I started not microdosing, but major dosing caffeine. And for me, it has provided a miracle. It provided me the energy to be in the gym, but it also lifted my mood throughout the day. So you can have that with junk coffee or high caffeine or drinking a bunch of 5-hour energies, but here's what you don't get. You don't get a bag of coffee that says God Country Team on it. In the case of Bone Frog, you get 10% of proceeds always go to the Navy SEAL Foundation to help the families of fallen Navy SEALs. And you get the knowledge of knowing you're working with a guy who worked for you in 3 deployments as a medic attached to the SEAL teams. Go to bonefrogcoffee.com/Todd. You'll get 10% off your first purchase. Suggestion for your first purchase? Get the sample pack, 6 4-ounce samples of Bone Frog so you could try all of the roasts, etc. If you're already drinking Bone Frog occasionally, then step up and get a subscription. You'll save 15% on your coffee. Go to bonefrogcoffee.com/Todd. This is a pretty insane chart, and I grabbed this off of Twitter from a guy who tracks things like this. It's Carnivore Aurelius, and he does things to track the Americans' use of food. In 1990, there were 0 U.S. states that had obesity rates over 20%. Now, this is based upon the body mass index, which is a junk methodology, but in a general sense, for the general population, it works. We can talk later about why it's a junk methodology for specific people. Now, right now, there are no states in 2024, 34 years later, there are no states that have obesity rates under 20%. If you think about the implications of this in a country that likes to talk about healthcare as a cost center in government, that is a massive cost center because being fat makes you sick. It lends to your joints breaking down, heart disease, lung disease, metabolic disorder. Metabolic disorder can screw your whole system up. Even your mentality can lead to depression. It can lead to lack of ability to thrive. And in men, extra fat is extra estrogen. The fatter you are, the less testosterone your body is able to produce and sustain and hold on to. And the less muscle you can sustain as you create less and less activity. So how are people getting hooked into this? Part of it has to do with the chemical labs that are fast food. They know exactly the mix of salt, sugar, and fat. They don't give a stinking hoot about protein levels. They'll talk about it. It's got this many grams of protein. But when it's keyed up to key your pleasure centers, that's what gets you addicted. As a dude who was addicted to fast food, I can tell you that just less than 4 years ago, I conned myself into going to McDonald's. Totally conned myself. I hadn't had fast food in forever. And I'd read this article that the double cheeseburger at McDonald's is the most macrobiotically correct meal you can have because it's 40, 30, 30. 40% protein, 30% fat, 30% carbohydrates. And if you have to eat something on the road, eat that. And I conned myself into stopping at McDonald's on the way home. And I had 2 of those things. And I tracked the calories. I even put it into my MyFitnessPal. And this is my pledging with my hand to the sky. We're not to pledge needlessly to God on weak things. But let me tell you this. I drove away from that place and I jonesed for that hamburger within 10 minutes, maybe even 5. I was jonesing for another. And I went 3 days in a row, stopping and eating that garbage. I could drive by and smell it. It was my pleasure centers, dopamine, serotonin. It is keying your body up into, you have found the miracle drug. God didn't design us to have this stuff so easily. He designed us to have to toil to get it after the garden. Even in the garden, we were to work. It's man that's designed this. There are people who are tracking this, and they know what you're really chasing. Do you know what you're really chasing? Do you know the drug you're really chasing? I'll tell you about that in a second. This is someone called the Food Babe, and she is testifying about the U.S. food system. Thomas Massey put this up. Her real name is Vani Hari. Here she is.
11 ingredients.
In the U.S., there are 11 ingredients. In the U.K., there's
3, and salt is optional. An ingredient called dimethylpolysiloxane is an ingredient preserved with formaldehyde, a neurotoxin. This is Skittles. Notice the long list of ingredient differences. 10 artificial dyes in the U.S. version and titanium dioxide. This ingredient is banned in Europe because it can cause DNA damage. Artificial dyes are made from petroleum, and products containing these dyes require a warning label in Europe, and they have been linked to cancer and disruptions in the immune system. This on the screen back here is Gatorade. In the U.S., they use red 40 and caramel color. In Germany, they don't. They use carrot and sweet potatoes to color their Gatorade. This is Doritos. The U.S. version has 3 different artificial dyes and MSG. The U.K. version does not. General Mills is definitely playing some tricks on us. They launched a new version of Trix just recently in Australia. It has no dyes. They even advertise that when the U.S. version still does. This is why I became a food activist. My name is Vani Hari, and I only want one thing. I want Americans to be treated the same way as citizens in other countries by our own American companies.
Thomas Massey posted that. Thomas Massey, as you know, has a degree from MIT. He's one of the smartest members of Congress. What are you addicted to? Well, it's the chemicals. It's the high. Got that. You know what it really is? You're chasing insulin. This is what happens, is your body is not designed to be rushed with this amount of bioavailable sugars and fats that instantly hit the bloodstream. It instantly hits the bloodstream, so it instantly satiates. In other words, it thrills the flesh. There's a reason the Bible talks about lands of milk and honey. We look at that and say, milk and honey, go buy some. Honey was really difficult to get. So was milk. It was difficult to get, and we got it. It felt like a reward. The land of milk and honey. High fructose corn syrup is honey times a gajillion in terms of how it hits your bloodstream. And it creates a need for insulin in the body. So you end up chasing this insulin high because it feels so good. That's why after you eat this garbage, you want more because your body's saying, man, we got a lot more. And you're Jones. The closer a thing looks like what you'd find in nature, the better it is for you. And this is what I learned. In going from nearly 400 pounds to about 208 pounds, 9.9% body fat in my mid-50s. I'm over my mid-50s now, actually. I'm 57. It was to eat foods that look like you would find in nature. Yes, I supplement with whey powders, whey protein powders, and that's basically by supplements because I need so much protein. And if I didn't have to do that, I wouldn't. Stop letting them make you fat and miserable and depressed and unhappy and weak. Eat lean meats. Eat fresh fruits and vegetables, mostly vegetables. Eat handfuls of seeds and nuts, a little bit of starch, and zero sugar. If you do that, I guarantee you'll see positive changes in your life. In other words, go eat the way God designed us to eat.